Hello class, here is the lecture on African kingdoms. Today we're going to be looking at World History 1 Standard 10D, describing East African kingdoms of Axum and Zimbabwe and West African civilizations of Ghana, Mali, and Songhai in terms of geography, society, economy, and religion. The essential question for today is, what is your first thought when you hear about Africa? Most people today, when they hear about Africa, or if someone mentions Africa to them, many people think of rainforests, many people think of the heat, many people think of the desert. A lot of people, unfortunately, think of it as a very poor continent. And the reason that this is the essential question is because you're going to learn in this lecture that Africa is the richest continent on the planet, and during the time of study that we're going to talk about, during which is what is the medieval period, many countries in Africa were the richest in the world. Africa versus India. Can you see the difference? Many students get confused about Africa and India when they look at a map. If you look at Africa here, it's a big pork chop, and it has the wing over here, which is Saudi Arabia or the Arabian Peninsula, and then it has a little side piece over here, which is Madagascar, the same Madagascar from the film. On the right, this is India. India doesn't have a wing on the side, and it does not have a side piece. It has a teardrop. Think of India as being single, and it wants somebody, so it has a teardrop. It's crying. Africa is much larger. It has a wing side, and it also has a side piece. So think of Africa as not being single. Think of India as being single with a teardrop on the southern part of it. So what were the three main West African kingdoms? The Empire of Ghana, which still exists today, but it was a kingdom from the year 800 to the year 1076. The Empire of Mali, which still exists today. It started in 1235, and the empire ended in the 1400s. And the Songhai Empire, which no longer exists at all, started in the 1400s and ended in 1591. All three kingdoms relied on the Niger River. So a lot of you all are going to be tempted to use the N word when pronouncing this, but the N word has two G's in it. This only has one. It is the Niger River. So here's a map of the continent of Africa, and this is where the Empire of Ghana was located. As you see, it's on the west coast of Africa. Here's the Empire of Mali, again on the west coast of Africa. And here was the Songhai Empire on the west coast of Africa. And if you notice, all three relied on the same river, and this river ran kind of like an upside down U, the Niger River. And if you go further, just so that you understand where you are geographically, if you go further over, you will have Egypt up here, and we all know what river flowed through Egypt, the Nile River. But now we're over here in West Africa with the Niger River. What was the Trans-Saharan trade route? And we've mentioned this before when we talked about the spread of Islam. The trade of gold and salt across the Saharan desert to and from the West African kingdoms. And you know, trans means going across or moving across, which is why we call our vehicles, our cars and trucks, transportation, because they move across something. So the Trans-Saharan trade route was the trade routes where gold and salt were traded across. And gold and salt, if you were asked on your SOL, are going to be the two major trading items for Africa. Islam will also spread from the Arabian Peninsula through the trade route. So if you know your map, you'll know that the Arabian Peninsula is right here, and we know that this is where Islam started. As Islam spread, and we talked about the spread of Islam in Unit 4, it is going to spread across the trans-Saharan trade route. And you see it's going to go through Egypt, and it's going to go all the way over here, and it's going to be on the western side, and this is where the Songhai Empire, the Ghana Empire, and the Mali Empire are going to be located. So this gives you a hint that something else is also going to spread, not only gold and salt, but the religion of the Arabian Peninsula. And here's another colorful diagram on the trans-Saharan trade routes and which areas they went to, which is indicated in red as you look at the legend, major trade routes. So which religion spread into the West African kingdoms of Ghana, Mali, and Songhai? Because it came from the Arabian Peninsula, we know that the answer is Islam. Which items were important trading commodities for West African kingdoms? And a commodity is a trade good. Salt, sugar, minerals, lumber, anything that you can trade is a commodity. And even during the transatlantic slave trade, slaves from Africa were also referred to as commodities. But in this case, which items were important trading commodities? We said gold and salt. What was the significance of the city of Timbuktu? Now, many of you have heard of the city of Timbuktu. Many didn't believe it was a real place, but it actually was. Timbuktu became the center of trade and learning in Africa. It aided in spreading the Islamic religion and culture across Africa. So it was like the Rome of Africa. It was like the Athens. It was like Sparta. It was a very major city. It was like the Constantinople of Africa. This is where all the trading and learning this took place in the continent of Africa. So here on the left is a map of where Timbuktu is. As you see, it's on the west coast of Africa. And we see what river flows through the Niger River. So Timbuktu is located in present-day Mali, and it was also a key part of the ancient Mali Empire as well. So, which event helped to spread Islam in Africa? Of course, establishment of trade with Timbuktu. Timbuktu is going to be the center of trade, and that's where the Islamic traders from the Arabian Peninsula are going to go and settle. What was the significance of Axum? And it is spelt two different ways, as you see, A-X-U-M and A-S-K-U-M. You're going to see both variations, so you need to be aware of how it's spelled. Very similar to the Quran, how it's spelled with a Q, and then it's also spelled with a K. Axum was located in the Ethiopian highlands along the Nile River. It is a kingdom that converted to Christianity. This is extremely important because, as we know, through the trans-Saharan trade routes, most of Africa is going to convert to Islam, but Axum is going to convert to Christianity, and it's going to be one of the only African kingdoms to do so. So here's a map of Axum. Actually, as you see, it's spelled in another way here, but it is on the Ethiopian highlands, on the eastern side of Africa. And if you know your geography, you'll know that if the Nile River flows through Axum, then what must be to the north of Axum? Egypt. So here is a map that you may see on the SOL. I actually guarantee you will see it on the SOL. This has been on the SOL every year. Which empire was a Christian kingdom? And we know that the Christian kingdom is number 1, and the Christian kingdom is called Axum. 2 and 3 would be Ghana and Mali and Songhai, and 4 is another African kingdom that we're going to get to in a second. But you have to know that Axum is on the eastern side of the African continent. Here is the African kingdom to the south. It is called Zimbabwe, and many of you have probably heard of Zimbabwe. Zimbabwe is, if you look at this map here, it is bordered by 2 rivers, the Limpopo River to the south and the Zambezi River to the north. And it is also to the west of the Indian Ocean. This is an artist's depiction of the capital of Zimbabwe. The capital of Zimbabwe is easy to remember. It was called the Great Zimbabwe. So it would be, an example would be, we're called the United States of America. Our capital would be called the Great United States. So they were called Zimbabwe, but their capital was called the Great Zimbabwe. Here is a picture of what the Great Zimbabwe looks like today. You can visit it. It is a city of ruins. It is ancient, and many tourists go there. And you see this is what the Great Wall looked like back then, and this is how it looks today. Describe the empire of Zimbabwe. As we stated earlier in the map, it is bordered by both the Limpopo and Zambezi rivers, and its capital was called the Great Zimbabwe. These two rivers are extremely important for SOL testing. Which river was important to the development of the Kingdom of Zimbabwe? And of course, we know it is the Limpopo River, as the Nile River was for Egypt and Axum, and the Niger River was for Ghana, the Songhai Empire, and the Mali Empire. The Limpopo and Zambezi rivers were boundaries for the Empire of Zimbabwe. And you see how there are two different variations of how they can come at you with the question. They can ask you which river was important to Zimbabwe, or they'll ask you which country was important to the two rivers. So you have to know both angles of how they're going to approach you with that question. These were the lectures for the African kingdoms. Now go on to Google Classroom and complete your DBQs on this lesson. If you have any questions, please contact me via the Remind Me app.